Members of council and ladies and gentlemen, we'll be getting council underway in probably 4 or 5 minutes. But there's an overflow room downstairs there, and I can observe that we're almost at capacity in this room now. There's a staff person or two. If you don't know where it is, they'll guide you down there. Just in case you want to be deputized to speak here this evening, we'd certainly give you ample time if you happen to be downstairs to make sure you get up here. We'll make sure of that. But I know in committee and Councillor Malboof will be in the chair then. We'll make sure that everybody gets heard. But there are limitations with the capacity here. So just make mention of that. Anybody that wants to be heard on anything will be heard here this evening. Members of council, ladies and gentlemen, the clerk informs me that it is now 7 o'clock, so I will call this council meeting to order. And I would ask you please to stand and join with me in a moment of silent reflection on our national anthem, O Canada. Madam Clerk, are there any agenda announcements and/or amendments?
Yes, thank you. Just one. A revision to staff report CORS 0920 was noted as an addendum to this evening's agenda, which was posted online and distributed to Council on February 28th. Hard copies of the revised report have been provided on Council's desks. This item was listed as consent item 6 on the addendum, but will be listed as consent item 3, as this is a revised version and a replacement of CORS 0920.
And I thank you very much for that. Are there any comments or questions on that revision? Being none, I think it's pretty straightforward. Disclosures, any member of council, any disclosures this evening? None whatsoever. I have a resolution moved by Councillor Ali and seconded by Councillor Hamid, and be it resolved that consent items numbers 1 to 5 be approved. Are there any one of those that any member wish pulled out and dealt with separately? Councillor Best?
Item 3.
3. Councillor Melba?
3 as well.
3 as well. Any other item that any member wish pulled out and dealt with separately? Councillor Best?
Yes, regarding Schedule D of the parking enforcement, I'm glad to see this has been brought up to speed here, but just a question to staff, was this going to take care of the outstanding backlog we have in terms of parking enforcement? I know what Councillor Hamid and myself had a number of concerns regarding long-time parkers on streets.
Who best, Madam Clerk, to address that?
Yes, thank you. So this is a contract increase for an additional overnight shift for parking enforcement. So this is the result of reallocating funding and resources. So it's not a new parking position. It's just taking some of those daytime hours and allocating them to the evening.
Councillor Best?
Just on that, does it answer my question? Is this going to take care of the backlog we're facing with overnight parking?
Madam Clerk?
If I could defer to the Manager of Licensing and Enforcement for a little bit more information about that.
Appreciate that.
Come.
Through you, Your Worship. Thank you for the question, Councillor Best. We have been working diligently on our parking task list to clean some of the backlog. I'm happy to report that we are now at that point where we are dealing with calls that are coming in currently. We will, with this extension, we will have some additional resources to assist with the after-hours parking, some of the things that happen after midnight, as well as the snow clearing operations.
That's great to hear. Thank you.
Councillor Melba?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mine's on the same issue, the same line item, and it concerns, I just have a question about the $66,000 that we're looking at here. When I look at the number of hours, 5 hours, 5 days a week, my calculation, that comes out to about $51 an hour. I'm wondering what were we paying our in-house parking enforcement officers? I don't think it was $51 an hour. So I'm wondering if this is really saving us any money, or what's the justification of spending 66 when probably a bylaw enforcement officer is anywhere from 45 to 50. So,
Madam Clerk?
Through you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that question. So from a cost perspective, with respect to fleet, training, supervision, all the other overhead costs considered with this being an in-house position, this proposed solution is comparable and likely lower to the town covering the cost to deliver the services directly. So the reason that staff have looked at exploring this option of contracting the parking services out is due to the recruiting challenges that we have had with this position. And so we are looking at this as far as to assist with some more consistent enforcement in the evenings. But as well as being a comparable cost, if not some savings. So we are looking at that as being sort of a balanced approach as providing sort of in-house enforcement as well as the use of contracted services.
okay, appreciate that answer. Now, how locked in are we? Because, you know, this, I think, from what we've been hearing concerning bylaw enforcement and the backlog and everything, I think this will become the budget issue as we approach our budget. So I'd like to know, you know, how locked in are we with this outside contracting?
Madam Clerk?
Thank you. I'd like to defer to our Manager of Licensing and Enforcement if I can for this one, or to the Director of Finance.
Through the chair. So this is a one-year extension. Usually with contracts like this, we go out for multi-year, but we leave ourselves the option with a renewal each year. So with this extension, we'll have 1 year time period. If we get into budget and there's need for change, we'd be able to revisit it and have a potential effective date in next year's calendar year based on when this existing extension will terminate.
Okay, thank you. That's all, Mr. Mayor.
Anything further on 3? If not, there's no changes to anything, so those in favor of the motion as read, it's carried. Just before I relinquish the chair here, and Councillor Melboof will be taking over in committee, just want to thank the Chamber of Commerce and staff, and biggest majority of my colleagues were able to attend as well on behalf of the Chamber, as referred to as the Mayor's annual State of the Union address there. And it was a sellout crowd, and of course, everyone that I spoke to, they suggested that it was a job well done by the Chamber, so I just want to go on record and thanking the Chamber very much on bringing the citizens of the town of Milton right up to speed with regards to what's happening for the past year and what probably is likely to happen in the next year or two coming. So just want to thank staff, because I know they were involved, as I was, with the Chamber. So just want to thank you for that. Madam Clerk, have we forgotten anything in Council? If not, this Council meeting is now adjourned, and give us about 2 minutes to turn things around, and Councillor Melboof will assume the chair as acting mayor. Councillor Melboof, this meeting is adjourned.
Okay, I guess we'll get things going. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming out to watch me be acting mayor. I really appreciate y'all coming out in my support. So anyways, we will now move on to the agenda item under the public meetings. Now, public meeting is on staff report PD 008-20, and the subject is statutory public meeting on resubmission, official plan amendment, and zoning bylaw amendment by View Developments on Main for lands located at 28 and 60 Bronte Street North, Town Files LOPA 05/18 and Z-0718. So now this is the public portion of our agenda. Now, Council will not be making any decision on the application tonight. Anyone who would like to be informed, and when the final report will be going to Council, or anyone who wishes to speak but is not a registered delegate, please fill out the register located just inside the door over there. Now, this is a public meeting under the Planning Act for zoning bylaw amendment application, again by View Developments on Main for lands located at 28 and 60 Bronte Street North. If there is anyone other than a representative of the applicant in the audience who would like to speak on this matter, please raise your hand. Okay, I see a few hands. Okay, fine. You will be given an opportunity to speak later on. Registered delegates will be given the opportunity to speak first. Now, the purpose of this public meeting is to receive input on the proposed development application so that staff is aware of the issues raised by the public when completing the evaluation of the proposal. Staff will be taking detailed notes, however, will not be responding to questions except to provide clarification regarding the process or points of facts. Staff will respond to any issues raised through a future technical report with recommendations. So now I will call on the applicant or their representative if they wish to speak to the matter. I see the representative coming forward.
I think we might have some technical difficulties. The PowerPoint is only showing half the slide.
The program just responded that there's an issue with your slide, so it had to remove some errors to it. So sorry, that's what we have.
I bought like a paper version of it that maybe I can put down here. Will that work? Okay, 1 second. Sorry, everyone. Thank you very much. Good evening, Councillor Malbuff, Mayor Krantz, members of council, and members of the public. I am Jacob Caven with Korsiak Urban Planning. We are the planners for the Durante Group, the owner of the property. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to present changes to the proposal from the first public meeting held last April. Tonight's presentation will cover 3 main items. First, a brief overview of existing context and policy framework. Second, a description of the revised development proposal. And third, note how comments are being addressed. Beginning with the site context. The property is located at the northwest corner of Main Street West and Bronte Street North. The site has an area of 1.34 hectares with approximately 200 meters of frontage along Bronte Street North and approximately 60 meters of frontage along Main Street West. The TSC hardware store currently occupies approximately 2/3 of the lands, and the remainder of the site is vacant and vegetated. The site is within the town's built boundary, the central business district, and is identified within an intensification area. The official plan also designates the lands as the westernmost gateway of the central business district. Intensification and high quality, higher density development is encouraged in gateway locations. The town's official plan designates the site downtown supportive area. The proposed high-density residential, commercial, and office uses are permitted on the property. We are proposing an amendment to the town's official plan to increase the maximum building height of the property to 18 stories. Since our first submission, we have worked with staff to respond to comments received on the application. Key revisions to the proposed development include a reduction in maximum building height from 21 stories to 18 stories. The original concept proposed two buildings of 21 and 19 stories, where the taller building was located furthest from the Bronte and Main Street intersection. The revised concept proposes two buildings of 18 and 17 stories, where the taller building is located closest to the intersection. In addition to a reduction in stories, there has also been a reduction in individual floor height by 22.5 centimeters, combining for a 12-meter reduction of the tallest building. The average unit size has been reduced from approximately 800 square feet to approximately 650 square feet to reflect current market demands, which is to provide smaller, more affordable units. The original development concept was designed nearly 3 years ago when market demands were different. While gross floor area has been reduced, the result of smaller units has increased the unit count by 73. Additionally, Building A's commercial podium at the corner of Bronte Street and Main Street has increased in height from 1 story to 6 stories. And 850 square meters of office space has been added to the second floor of the podium to provide more live-work opportunities in downtown. Regarding urban design, built form, massing, and height, in addition to reducing the building heights, the buildings have been reoriented, massing has been shifted, and tower floor plates have been reconfigured to conform to the town's tall building guidelines. The combination of reduced building height and the reconfiguration of buildings has resulted in less shadow impact to adjacent lands and greater preservation of views to the escarpment. The proposed development fully conforms with the town's shadow impact guidelines. A pedestrian plaza is still proposed at the Bronte and Main Street intersection. Commercial uses and potentially a restaurant will occupy the first level of the commercial podium, which will activate this privately owned public space. The retaining wall previously bordering the plaza and much of the site's Bronte Street frontage has been removed, providing greater pedestrian accessibility to the site. Comments provided on the first submission have been addressed through the resubmission of supporting material. We have worked with town staff to address comments regarding urban design, built form, height, and massing, resulting in the resubmission of revised architectural plans, an urban design brief, and a shadow impact study. Comments regarding wind impact, environmental assessment, stormwater management, and traffic impact and parking have been addressed through the submission of technical reports, which are under staff review. A technical report with staff recommendations will be brought forward for council's consideration at a future meeting upon the completion of the evaluation of the application. Thank you. This concludes my presentation. I'd be pleased to answer questions.
Are there any questions of the delegations from members of council? Councillor Bess?
Yes, thank you for your presentation. Could you go back to your second slide, the site context? If possible. While you're bringing that up, just a question. This is unique to my knowledge, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but I've never seen an application come back with a revision like this. Could you describe more, beside market forces, why you've made the changes, especially adding 73 more units?
Yes, thanks, Councillor Best. So like I mentioned, our first concept was devised or prepared nearly 3 years ago when the market was favoring larger units. A lot has changed since that time. Construction prices have went up, and also lack of supply is driving prices as well. So this iteration features smaller units to be more affordable. And like I said, even though the gross floor area has reduced, there is an increase in units.
The reason for my request here is, do I understand that this is the site we're talking about, but also the owner owns additional lands? Is there any possibility of squaring off the property and adding additional parkings? Because I have some further questions to staff afterwards, rather than having such a odd-looking parcel. And also, what are the future plans for the area to the north?
So currently, the diagonal line of the property is the former rail spur line. And that line also represents the northern limits of the central business district. The lands to the north are currently designated as employment lands. So any future uses to residential would have to go through a municipal comprehensive review. As of right now, only employment uses.
Thank you for that confirmation. Also, what type of retail and office uses are you hoping to attract?
I think it's a bit too early to provide any definitive answer, but we're hoping to provide uses that support the downtown area. There's, going to be potentially, well, we're proposing like 500 units there that could, that would do well to have some commercial space, but also we would like to add some office space as well to provide those live-work opportunities. And like I said, as the intersection of Bronte and Main Street has the pedestrian plaza, it would be desirable to have uses that will activate that space. So potentially a restaurant.
Thank you for your answers. I'll be asking staff some questions after. Thank you.
That's fine. Councillor Tisha Dirksen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for your presentation. Could you comment on the changes you've made to the parking provisions? The numbers of spots.
The number of spots haven't changed too drastically. The original submission, I believe, had 627 spaces, and now there are 635 spaces. That being said, the same principles apply. We are applying for an amendment to the zoning bylaw, which would permit approximately 1 space per residential unit, which is a variance on what is currently permitted, while maintaining the 0.25 spaces per unit for visitor spaces. And also we are applying to share those visitor spaces with the proposed non-residential uses, which is typical for mixed-use developments like this, as the peak use period for those uses offset each other.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from council? I have a couple. Maybe I missed it in the report, but of the number of units, residential units, are these all condos? Are they a mixture of apartments and condos? Have you taken a look at that, and any decisions been made on what we're looking at here?
It's my understanding at this particular moment that they would be condo units.
And has there been any thought or consideration given about what the price range are going to be for these units? Have you gotten that far yet?
No, that will be determined further through detailed design and marketing.
Well, thank you. There are no other questions for the applicant. Then we'll move to the registered delegations. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have 5 registered delegates, and we'll be who registered to speak to this issue. So we'll deal with them first. The first delegate is Mr. Richard Brown. If you would come forward, please state again your name and address for the record.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Richard Brown. I live at 121 Mill Street in Milton. And good evening, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, councillors. Good evening, town staff, ladies and gentlemen. I am here as a representative of a community group called Our Milton, Miltonians for Sensible Development. There are a number of us that will be speaking tonight in no particular order. One of the things that I wanted to have addressed tonight, and it's not just with this particular development, it's with all these types of developments, sizable developments, the ones like at Thompson Road and Darien Highway 5, and that is how this town is going to be addressing these developments with respect to climate change. And I'm going to just start with some of the headlines in the news, very recent news, with respect to these buildings. I'll start with one, and these are all recent, and it folds into the climate emergency document that you have taken on back in October. So here's just an example from Vice News. Energy efficient condos and office towers are the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions, but hey, developers love them. On April 22nd, Earth Day, New York Mayor Bill de Blasio announced he would introduce legislation to ban glass and steel buildings that have contributed so much to global warming. They have no place in our city or on the earth, he stated. GVCA Construction Association. Glass skyscrapers have turned entire cities into energy vampires. According to the International Energy Agency, IEA, those glass buildings are energy guzzlers, and the biggest contributor to gas emissions in urban centers, even more so than transportation. And ignoring them means that one of our biggest catalysts for climate change remains unchecked. A 2017 study found that 66% of greenhouse gas emissions in New York came from glass buildings. This is compatible to the research on Toronto, which shows that buildings create 60% and the vast majority of the city's greenhouse gas emissions. The Guardian. Experts call for ban on buildings to save energy in climate crisis. The Journal of American Institute of Architectures. Climate is changing, so must architecture. Carbon dioxide causes global warming. Building emits almost half of the carbon dioxide in the U.S. That must stop. According to the United Nations, 40% of the world's energy consumption, around 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions, can be attributed to glass buildings. CBC News. Amid a climate crisis, it's time for Vancouver to ditch inefficient glass towers. A UBC expert says the city glass towers are undercutting the goal of being the greenest city in the world. The city to meet its 2020 emission targets, for the city to meet its 2020 emission targets, you'd have to rip the glass skins off every building. A BC Hydro report early this year found that new high-rise buildings use twice as much electricity as high-rise buildings built in the 80s, even though the newer buildings are marketed as efficient and energy efficient. Now Toronto. Toronto glass condos are burning thermal holes in the sky. BBC UK, everyone needs to stop building giant glass buildings right now. Towering glass structures are an environmental nightmare, and there's growing consensus that we should stop building them. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about the climate emergency document that you recently put together in October. And I would like ultimately to add something or give that to your consideration. So part of what you have written reads, be it resolved that the town of Milton declares an emergency, a climate emergency and climate change mitigation, and its immediate and continual priority for the municipality. And whereas, adopt a carbon neutral as a modern, logical, scientifically sound, and socially and economically beneficial endeavor to which the town of Milton has proactively embraced for its own social and economic benefit by setting goals for the town operations through green innovation plans. And whereas the government, the local government holds the power and direct relationship to the citizens to educate, modify, and mitigate the human activity that contributes to climate change, including low-carbon communities. That's out of your document. And whereas the time horizon of private citizens, decision makers, and political influence must look beyond our own lifetimes and consider the cost of our actions in our ongoing social contract and to the legacy of future generations. Then you go on to say, and be it further resolved, the council directs this resolution to staff to undertake the following: to indicate to staff a dedicated substantial in energy management in the 2020 budget, direct staff to inquire and provide council with a report to long-term potential costs benefiting of transition towns of fleet and electric vehicles, that staff provide an annual report to Milton Council on corporate initiatives related to climate change and mitigation, and that staff consider all opportunities, including language future policy planning work that acknowledge climate change. What it doesn't do, it doesn't direct staff to provide council with a report, so to strongly encourage, rather, the development community to address climate change in their design for future medium and high-density applications. I believe that is critical at this stage. And in fact, if there is an opportunity to review the other applications that have gone through, I understand some of it is on hold at Thompson Road and Highway 5 in Derry, this should be reviewed. It's imperative. Climate change is real. So the questions will be, and I'd like to know from town staff, how is town staff reviewing climate change impact for this development? I asked that question to staff at a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and there was no answer provided. So how did town staff review climate change implications for the projects at Thompson Road and Derry Road? And what's council's position on climate change now with new and medium and large developments? And I would also ask that town staff include this into the questions back to the developer. We stood up here back in April, many of us, not one of our comments was included going back to the developer, not one. And I'm surprised and shocked that that didn't happen. So we are asking.
You have a minute left, sir.
I have a minute left? Yep. Well, excuse me, but they took 25. So bear with me, I've just got another minute. Thank you. And it's one question that I want to ask afterwards, so not right afterwards, right now. And that is, like I said, not one question was that we saw in the submission back to the developer, any public comment, not one of our comments went back to the developer and wasn't addressed. We're here, we put a lot of time into this, we expect our issues to be addressed. I do have one final question, just while it's off topic a little bit here. And that was, at the last meeting, Councillor Best, you asked that town staff provide a 3D video rendering of what this looks like, so everyone can see what it's going to do, the escarpment. Everyone can see what it's going to look like if you're standing on Main Street, not these pictures that are somewhat, I would say, deceptive. So I hope that that would still be a request. With that, thank you very much. If anyone has questions.
Well, there may be questions.
Pardon me?
There may be questions from members of council. Any questions for the delegation? No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, again, just want to reiterate, we have a time limit of 10 minutes for delegations, and we have a number of people that wish to speak on this, so out of fairness, I will be holding to the 10 minutes. All right, our next speaker is Mr. Jim Jones. If you will come forward, please.
The button's on. Acting Mayor, Your Worship, members of council, my name is Jim Jones. My wife and I live at 94 Victoria Street. When I looked at the Milton website to sign up to speak tonight, it said that I needed to bring 21 copies of any brochures or anything that I was going to use. Well, I didn't have that, and I don't have any slides. But I remembered that back in, I guess, May last year, I did send an email to all of you. In fact, I sent it on instructions to executiveservices@milton.ca. And I did receive a reply saying that thank you for your email, and a copy of acknowledgement and your correspondence has been forwarded to Barb Koopmans, Commissioner, for review and response, as well as to Council for their information. So I was just wondering if anybody remembers that email at all? Remember getting it? Do you? Well, just in case you don't, I did bring what I wrote. So if I could give it to someone maybe, and we could make copies, if you want them. Thank you. As I said, I live at 94 Victoria Street, but I've lived in Milton since 1974, when I purchased a townhouse at Woodward and Wilson. And since then, I've lived in 3 different other houses before, fortunately, ending up on Victoria Street. And I stand here back 46 years ago because there's no doubt in my mind that I stood here on this spot answering a summons issued by the town of Milton for, guess what? Overnight parking. So it was a magistrate or a JP, and I'm probably lucky that it wasn't Deputy Mayor Malbouf that was sitting on the bench. Anyway, I was lucky to know that a parking ticket for overnight parking needed 2 times, and there was only 1 time on it, so I was found not guilty. And I've lived here ever since and love Milton. I was here back in April at the meeting and listened to what was going on. And then I thought about it, and that's why this email came out. Much was made about the height of the buildings, of course, and how they would block the view of the escarpment, which is Milton's crowning glory. I suspect that because of the railway embankment, some people at the west end of Victoria Street probably can't see the escarpment because of that. But what they will see, and what others will see if this goes through, is just one solid barrier of concrete and glass. Just unbelievable. And then I had a look at the request made by the developer to amend the Town of Milton Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw. And by gosh, that's an awful lot of amendments they're looking for. Just terrible. And then, of course, as we've discovered tonight, instead of 435 new residences, we're now up to 508. And they're asking for an application to change the parking bylaw. Well, as an expert in parking, and I know that it's going to be a problem, but I don't remember seeing a Halton Regional Policeman doing an overnight parking ticket recently, but I see now we have the Garda, and the Garda is going to look after it for us, so we should be in good hands. But parking will still be a problem. There'll be parking on Mill Street, Victoria Street, Elizabeth Street, the liquor store, the gas station. There's just not going to be enough parking available. I also looked at the entrance and exits from the development. One goes on to Bronte Street, and one goes on to Main Street. Well, the one across Bronte Street comes right across Victoria Street. That's exactly across, and they'll come right across there. I have seen Victoria Street during, well, the summertime at the park. It's just parked end to end. If there's a funeral that's got early, it's parked end to end. The market's on a Saturday, it's parked end to end. And it becomes a one-way street almost. And then you're looking at ambulances, fire, and all that kind of stuff. I respectfully request that when council's making a decision on this application, that they use simple common sense. If it's applied, then surely common sense would say that this development as proposed is not in keeping with the town of Milton's official plan or the town of Milton's mature neighbourhood character study, which is presently under review, and I ask that it not be allowed. Now, I've no doubt in my mind that TSC needs some TLC. It's not exactly nice, you know, but not of this magnitude. Your Worship, in 1982, in your first term as mayor, you and your council showed excellent common sense in voting to purchase this building, this magnificent building, for $1. I know, because I was here at the time, that some people didn't think you should. In fact, I guess like us, they were objecting. But my hope is that you will again guide council to use common sense and deny this development as proposed. I appreciate your time. Thank you. And I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, for staying under your 10 minutes. That's very good. Any questions for the delegation from council? Councillor Dirksen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for your presentation. Just anecdotally, you don't have to provide data or anything technical, but you mentioned several times that the application as proposed. So what do you propose? What do you imagine in this spot where the TSC currently is?
I could imagine, and this is just me, if you go down 25 about Laurier on the east side, I think if that's where I'm, there's a townhouse development going in there. To me, that seems reasonable. I don't even know how high that is. It's probably about 3 or 4 up, you know. And it looks good. I could visualize something like that. These, you know, if this is approved, then it's going to be the Great Wall of Bronte, you know, all the way up there. You'll have the high rise. And if I've got another minute, I heard and read that some councillors thought this should not be opposed because they'll just go to the OMB and they'll approve it. Well, if that's the sort of way of thinking, that's a shame. That's a real shame. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? No. Thank you, Mr. Jones. You can take your seat now. All right, next we have Ms. Susan Hooper. Would like to come forward? Thank you. State your name and address for the record, and then you can start.
Sure. It's, I was just waiting for my PowerPoint to come up. My name is Susan Hooper, and I live at 91 Mill Street. So, Your Worship, members of council, my question for the applicant actually is my question is for the town staff. My question is, what standards is this applicant being held to in terms of fitting in with the surrounding historical area? Because my husband and I, just over the past summer, built a one-story, two-car garage in the back of our property. And before we even broke ground, we had to get this approved by Heritage Milton. And we had to show our plans, and we had to prove that our one-story, two-car structure would fit in with the surrounding heritage area, and that we were building an appropriate structure. Yet, within a 200-meter distance, this proposal includes 2 glass towers and a very modern-looking 6-story podium. And it does not appear, from what I can see from this application, that any of these same standards are being applied. So on this note, I would like to show some examples of what other Ontario towns are doing that have similar historical areas and how they're handling condominium development. Next slide, please. Oh, my clicker's here, okay. Okay, so in the town of Unionville, my father actually lives here in this town, and I can tell you that on any given weekend, this town is very busy with people, and it's a similar town to Milton in that there's a mill pond and a park at the top end of the street. I'm taking the verbiage right from these developments' websites just to be able to show the kinds of visions and thinking behind these developments. This is a 4-story boutique-inspired residence with stately mansard roof, heritage-style brick, and precast stone accent features. In fact, with this 4 stories, this would actually fit within our official plan. The Monaco condominium development in Collingwood is being built on the only lands designated for condominium development in Collingwood's downtown Heritage Conservation District. Monaco was masterfully crafted to evoke a sense of timelessness and grandeur while honoring the culture, character, and history of downtown area and preserving its undeniable charm. And last but not least, embracing heritage and character. This development on the Elora Gorge being built alongside the historic Elora Mill Hotel and Spa overlooks the Grand River just steps away from the village. This is what destination towns are doing with condominium developments in their heritage area. And all of these towns are known to attract and draw in visitors where the businesses and everybody benefits. And in my opinion, I think that we should be able to do the exact same thing here in Milton, but we need to have the will to make this happen, and we need to have developers that have the vision to make this happen. So on a closing note, I just wanted to state that when developments are built that blend in with their communities, everybody wins. The people win, the businesses win, and the overall town wins. Thank you, everybody.
Any questions for the delegation from members of council? Being none, thank you very much. Call up the next delegation, which would be Ms. Cybolski. I hope I got that right. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to start the timer. Go. Acting Mayor Malbuff, Your Worship, members of council, and members of the public. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you tonight. You may recall that last April I presented some key considerations around our town's playbook and the criteria being used to evaluate development applications. At that time, I spoke about version 1 of the proposal and how I felt it didn't fit in with the official plan, the intensification study that was completed several years ago, and other guidelines that residents expect to be able to rely upon. Being a CPA by training, I'm a big fan of consistent process because I feel it creates a more even playing field. And like many other professional groups, we abide by rules, so I can't help it. I'm an accountant, I like rules. There's accounting rules, tax rules, auditing rules, rules of professional conduct that we all abide by. If the goalposts are changing, everyone knows about it and has a chance to contribute. So the framework is consistent across the board. And stakeholders have easy access to the rules, and any changes to the rules are disclosed and are not generally made on a one-off basis. So tonight, what I'd like to do is spend some time providing several important points of comparison between the current proposed development at Bronte in Maine and 2 other recently approved developments in Milton. So that would be the 3 towers behind the Superstore and the 3 towers and townhomes at Derry in Ontario. And in doing so, I'm hoping to remind you of the importance of consistency in your eventual decision-making process on the current application and others that may come into the hopper, particularly when it comes to giving residents some confidence that the goalposts are firmly in place. So just for reference, these are the developments that I'd like to speak about tonight, the 2 approved and 1 proposed. And as you heard earlier, I believe some of these are, the top 2 are subject still to some final resolutions of technical matters or holdings. That being said, first, inside the Urban Growth Center. So with the Thompson and Maine towers, there's close proximity to the GO, and the towers will be built directly within the defined Urban Growth Center. And what my opinion is that this is my personal opinion only, that the approved height of these buildings is a bit out of proportion. The site is within the defined UGC, and there are a couple of other developments that are completed or near on their way to being completed, also within that area. The application at Ontario and Derry is not in the UGC, but was approved on other merits. But the proposed development is outside of the Urban Growth Center. Next, let's think about the intersection that these developments are located at. So Thompson and Maine and Ontario and Derry are at a major intersection of arterial roads. And so while the Thompson or the Ontario and Derry site may not be within the Urban Growth Center, one of the major bases for approval is the location at the intersection of 2 arterial roads. So we've heard some concerns about traffic, and Main Street and Bronte Street are not arterial roads. It's a different ballgame. Are the developments reasonably walkable to the GO station? So in the case of Thompson and Maine, yep, that's pretty obvious. Ontario and Derry, I would say no, although some people might want to walk. And same with Maine and Bronte, not reasonably walkable for most people if they're commuting. I would like to point out, just as an aside, because there has been some discussion on parking, that the parking at Thompson and Maine is equal to the proposed parking at Ontario and Derry in terms of number of spaces per unit. If you look at the combined per residence plus visitor parking, both of those are greater than what's being proposed in this current proposal at Maine and Bronte. One final thing on this is I really want to flag for you, and I won't read all the wording from the staff technical report from the Thompson and Maine approved development, but one of the main tenets for approval of the development was the fact that it's in the Urban Growth Center and close to the major transit station, and so that was heavily relied upon in the technical report. It was honed in on several times. Next. Proximity to grocery shopping. So one of the things in the urban design brief that in the current proposal is that they're trying to promote a walkable community, and that's great. I'm totally in favor of that. And so one of the points in the urban design brief is that this location is transit supportive, but I would just ask, how can that really be if people are still driving to the GO station and they still have to drive to buy their groceries and other necessities? And we can't expect people to not drive in Milton. I mean, sometimes you can walk and sometimes you can't. So I'm not going to walk home from the Superstore with 3 boxes of diapers. So the wording in the urban design brief, I just want to flag, it sort of paints the picture that people will take the bus and walk everywhere. And I think that's a bit of a stretch. I want to flag whether I think the proposal is in compliance in substance with the intensification study. And I would ask that, let's think about what the intensification study did. We spent a lot of money and time to define where we should pursue growth. And while the Ontario and Derry location is outside the urban growth centre and isn't really within reasonable walking distance to the GO, I remind you it is at the corner of 2 arterial roads, and plus people have access to, have an option of going to take the Lakeshore West line if they are able to drive down to the Bronte station. And if we start approving high-rises at all locations in Milton, outside of where we spent time defining where we should grow, then what was the point of the intensification study? And similarly, you heard Mr. Jones refer to the character study that has been completed in the adjacent character neighborhood. And so we may not be able to use the character study policies as part of the review of this application, but just I'd respectfully ask that we think about how much sense it makes when we spent money and time on studying and defining new potential rules for character area, putting this directly up against that character area. Like, it's technically outside of the zone, but it's right beside it. Okay. Not finally, sorry, I'm keeping track of time. I mentioned this in my April 2019 presentation. This is a brochure that is available on the website and also in Town Hall, if you can come and pick it up. And it's a Know Before You Buy guide. So my view is that in the case of Thompson and Maine and Ontario and Derry, you could argue that those things were partially in compliance with this Know Before You Buy guide. Thompson and Maine was originally zoned as urban growth center mixed use with a limit of 8 stories. Briarwood was zoned as future development. So that means that it was only zoned for existing uses, is my understanding. However, just by the fact that it's called future development, there seems to be some inference that it will be developed in the future into something. And as the applicant mentioned, Maine and Bronte is CBD-B zoned, which does include the possibility of high-density residential, but it is in the downtown supportive area, where the height limit is limited to 4 stories. So if I relied on the town's advice to know before I buy, I can't really know that a 17 or 18-story building would be approved without a crystal ball. I'm going to quickly skip over some of these, but I just want to show you, again, traffic impact because of the location. There's a big concern with the Maine and Bronte location. And this one's a bit, this one's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I do want to state that the developer has indicated that, in this case, trees will provide the transition and scale to the neighboring area. So Jacal Holdings relied on distance to the rear lot lines on Childs Drive. Briarwood, there's a green space between the proposed build and the closest neighboring low-density housing. However, the view report states that mature tree cover provides appropriate transition to neighboring residential areas. So not distance, but trees, which can become diseased, cut down, and in case any of you have driven by there recently, they have no leaves on them, so you can see through the branches. So it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I do want to just point out that I don't think that we should rely on that as an appropriate transition in scale. And finally, as you heard Mr. Jones talk about the view of the escarpment, single build site in this case, the applicant owns properties all the way up Bronte. So when you think about, I really encourage, as Mr. Brown did, a 3D study, because I really want you to think about what this could look like if we change the goalposts here. Does that mean that the currently zoned employment lands could then be also changed in the future? And what would that look like for the town? And in closing, I would suggest that this site is not compatible with, or this proposal is not compatible with existing or future surrounding land uses. And so I ask for a consistent application of the rules as you continue to review these developments that come before you. Thank you. Sorry, I was 8 seconds over.
Yeah, okay. Any questions for the delegation? Being none? Okay, thank you. All right, and then finally, our last registered delegate will be Ms. Marsha Waldy. If she will come forward, please. know who you are, but if you want to just give it for the record.
My name is Marcia Waldy. I live at 24 James Street. I think that's where I live, occasionally, anyways. Councillor Malbooth, Your Worship, fellow councillors, I appear here tonight to discuss the redrafting of the proposal being presented by the proponents to replace the co-op building at Bronte and Main. At the April meeting last year, many others and myself were here, and we do support development on the subject lands if it complies with the official plan and the official plan amendments number 31 modifications. We believe that this proposal still does not meet the town's official policy plan or the amendments. Now, you mentioned that, Mr. Malbooth, about some facts clarifications, and I'd like a few facts clarified. So I'd like the planning department, if we could get some things corrected, then that would be fine, because there are some misunderstandings out there. How is the subject land listed in the official plan? Now, my understanding, it's Central Business District Secondary Plan. Is that correct?
I don't know if it's appropriate for staff to be answering those questions.
That's a fact?
This time,
is that a fact?
It's a public meeting to hear from you, but this is not a detail.
But it's a fact.
Defer to the clerk.
Our public meeting procedure states that staff isn't really here to answer questions, but more to receive feedback.
So staff will take note of your questions.
Okay,
and then
that would
they
be
can
fine.
Get back to you. Is that all right with staff?
That'd be fine. Next thing is, what is the bylaw regarding the heights permitted on this subject land? My understanding, it's 4 plus a bonus of 2. So that's a question as well. What is the location for the town's designated urban growth center as per the provincial policy, places to grow? And my understanding with that is around Ontario Street and the GO train. So that's another question for confirmation. Where is the intensification corridors? And this I'm a little bit confused. I understand, I think it's Ontario Street, Derry Road, Louis St. Laurent Street, Britannia Road, and James Mould Parkway. Are those the only ones, or are there others? And my question is, when the applicant applied, did the staff go through these answers or these questions and clarify what is permitted on the subject lands? And I'm assuming they did. Now, if that occurred, then the proponent knew full well what was expected and yet are still trying to attempt to bypass Milton's official plan for their own financial benefit. From what I have read, I have to say that there is very little difference in the first submission, nor addressed, as Mr. Brown indicated, addressed many of the concerns that were expressed at the last council meeting. There certainly still is no meaningful setbacks for the heights requested. These towers are not appropriate, too tall, too wide. This glass wall structure of urban architecture is not an environmental plus for this location. Now, before staff recommendations come forward for your consideration, I have put together, and I will make sure that you all get one, a table with regards to the official plan and the official plan ALPRA 31 modifications. And there are about 38 things that this plan does still not comply with in the official plan. So I'll make sure that you all get a copy of that. And I'm just going to pull out a couple in relationship to this. Policy number 2.1.21, which is actually one of the first things listed in the plan. The maximum height, the benefit of the Niagara Escarpment and other natural resources. My comment, this is the first goal that is mentioned in the plan. The proposal reduces the benefit of the escarpment for Milton residents unless you're living in that condo. Policy number 2.8.3.8, new development located within the existing established district or neighborhood will be designed as an intricate part of the area's existing larger pattern of built form and open spaces reinforcing and complementing valuable existing patterns by complementing the existing range of building mass, height, proportion, enclosed volume, and position to the relative street size. My comment on that, this proposal is located within an established neighborhood, but it does not read as an integral part of this area. It does not reinforce or complement the existing pattern of development, as it does not reflect or transition of an established height, form, mass, or proportions within the established neighborhoods. Instead, it contrasts and clashes with the surrounding neighborhood and would therefore harm the character and appearance of Milton. Now, policy 3.5.3.6, OPRA number 31. Unplanned commercial development along the periphery of the central business district shall be restricted to protect a planned function of the central businesses. My comment to that, the form of development proposed by this condo development was not planned for or complementary to the official plan. It is therefore unplanned growth that should not be prevented. Another policy, number 3.5.3.5.9, OPRA 31, the scale and location of the new development within the historic downtown area shall be sensitive to the compatibility of the existing character and appearance. My comment on that, the scale and location of the proposed development is not sensitive or compatible with the existing character or appearance of the adjacent development within Milton's historic downtown area. This site is also, as indicated earlier, outside the UGC mixed-use subs area, where high-density residential and employment uses are contemplated. I won't go into, well, I'm going to give you one more here. Policy 3.5.3.23. All development within the central business district shall have regard for the general design objectives contained in section 28 of this plan and the urban design guidelines appended to this plan. My comment on that, the proposal have neither regard for the urban design objectives of section 2.8 of the official plan nor the urban design guidelines for the CBD. Now I've lost my sheets here. You need to have a wider pedestal here. Yeah, exactly. So when you get the package, I've listed the particular policy. I've listed, if it's applicable, the OPA 31, and then I've made comments. Now, it would be interesting to know why the town has not specified other lands where clusters of such tall buildings should be erected beyond the specified urban growth center. It seems that we are not keeping up with any future overall development vision as it relates to stated preferred tall building locations, such as your intensification corridors, but rather it appears to be a willy-nilly approach to high-rise when we look at the proposal at this particular location. Now, in the town's tall building guidelines, it clearly indicates the preferred locations, and number 1.2 mentions urban growth center, intensification corridors, and secondary mixed nodes. Note, this is not at this location. Now, it also goes on to mention gateways. Makes up, well, gateway, policy 2.8.2.16, well, to identify and encourage the maintenance and enhancement of gateway entrances, both from a vernacular and pedestrian point of view into the urban center. Well, my comment on this, this development does not maintain or enhance the intersection at Bronte and Main as a gateway into Milton. A gateway is an entrance, and it is therefore has two sides. To work as an entrance feature, it needs to be visibly related to the streetscape and the development on the south side of Bronte and Main. This proposal does not reinforce the gateway idea. Instead, it undermines that section as a gateway. So now we got a gateway here, we got a gateway down here. Gateways, you know what I'm saying,
You have a minute left, Ms. Wally.
Okay. It boils down to a few questions related to staff recommendations. Why support a structure that in the end would amount to well over 10 times the height from the street level of the surrounding areas? And I'm going to skip that if I've got, unfortunately, but I will see that you get a copy of that. It's too bad that I can't go through some of those things. In any event, councillors and staff, the Ontario government does not dictate or legislate where municipalities direct this type of development. That is Milton's job. Developers need to recognize Milton's stance on the official plan, which is to be allowed for all developments, and the value council puts on the quality of life for its citizens. Who is implementing, I'm going to skip again, unfortunately, down to, you got me rattled with that comment.
A few minutes over, man. So we're just trying to be fair to everybody.
I know, I understand. Okay. There are those sitting around this table who have expressed concerns with outside interference in the town's development policy. We need you, as our elected representatives and staff, to take control and stand up for us. Not the corporate business groups, but the little guy. Don't just go with the status quo because it's easier. You know as well as we do, this site is very suitable for mid-rise developments that would help with resident affordable housing. The subject lands certainly meet the qualifications. It is a mid-rise. It is a vernacular built form that is moderately taller than single-family homes. The scale and height of the mid-rise should be appropriate and proportionate to the street on which it is situated and the surrounding context. And the transition, also 1.4 of that said mid-rise, is mid-rise are lower than towers, but towers are mid-rises are lower than towers, but taller than single homes. Mid-rise can integrate harmoniously with the surrounding provided, and the massing and scale of the building carefully transition to adjacent lowland neighborhood. You know what is being proposed is well out of character with the surrounding area, and certainly is not compatible with the neighborhood. The residents, we want to retain Milton's character, and we want you to implement sensible development. And my final statement, I firmly believe that all residents feel very strong community spirit, our value and pride in our unique heritage, including our relationship with the escarpment. It is one of Milton's main attractions for those wanting to make Milton a location to reside.
Thank you, Ms. Waller, for your presentation. Due to your long-standing relationship with the town and all the work you've done here, we granted you some latitude there, so appreciate. And staff has taken note of all your questions, and a lot of them will be responded to in the technical report, and I'm sure they'll be getting back to you on those. Again, any questions from members of council? Councillor Tesser-Dirksen has some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Waldy, for that presentation. I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate because I think you'd be good at this. You did mention that the Ontario government should not be the body that dictates and legislates planning decisions of this nature. It should be within the hands of this council. As you know, we do have a body, the LPAT, or formerly the OMB, to which developers can appeal, and if we were to reject their applications. So my question to you, again, in the spirit of discussion, is if this council did reject this application as proposed, and the developer did appeal to the LPAT, and the town spent $350,000, $400,000 of taxpayer money defending ourselves before the LPAT and we lost, what type of advice would you give us when responding to taxpayers for the use of that money?
I would say wipe out your official plan amendments, because it means bugger all. You sitting around this table are our representatives. We depend on you. We're the little guy. We don't have the expertise as the planning department does, or the developers who can pay multi-million dollars to have somebody come in and put something together. We don't. We have to rely on you. This is our community, and you guys have to stand up for us. The government is there. In fact, I think one of your councillors just recently in the paper not too long ago made mention of these kinds of problems with the Ontario government and whatever. And so, you know, you've got to get together and maybe pull Oakville, Burlington, and Georgetown and pull you all together at the regional department and get together and get things straightened out and say, look, Ontario, we're not doing this. This is our property. This is our municipality, and we have to do what we can for our residents. That's the bottom line. Our quality of life for Miltonians.
Thank you. That's pretty much the answer I was expecting. Thank you.
Councillor Mead, you have a question? Or? Oh, Councillor Lee, sorry. Ms. Wall.
Sorry for bringing you back.
No
I just had a really short question. I know you mentioned mid-rise.
Pardon?
I know you mentioned mid-rise.
Yes.
And I was wondering what was the number you folks were looking for? How many stories is okay?
I think you've got to go by your official plan amendments. And as the question I asked, my understanding, that's designated for 4 floors with the possibility of bonus of 2.
Thank you.
And it's a perfect location for that. It fits into it perfectly. And as I say, I hope you all take the time before you actually make the decision to read the pamphlets, the information that I've given you. Okay? Thank you.
Any other questions from council?
Okay, Rick, what do you want to know?
Being no further registered delegates, I will now open the floor up to the public. But before I do, I'd just like to mention again, council will not be approving any development tonight. And but in the interest of time and to ensure that we get to hear all points of view, if someone who has already spoken has made the point you were planning to make, I would ask that you reconsider coming forward. This meeting is being recorded, and staff as well as members of council have taken detailed notes of what we're hearing tonight. I will not prevent anyone from speaking. Anybody can come forward, but I ask out of consideration for your neighbors and everyone here that you only come forward if you have something new to add to the discussion. And I thank you in advance for your cooperation. So having said that, who wants to go first? Sir? Staff, is there in the overflow room, or is everyone here? So just to remind you your name and address, and you have 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. My name's Richard Hooper. I live at 91 Mill Street. My wife and I are relatively new to the community, 4 years. We were drawn to this community from where places were before, and we just thought it was beautiful. And hearing all these things and hearing this proposal come in, which will truly have a negative effect on this community, and you can't say it won't. Like, we're going to lose this wonderful heritage to what the developer says is contemporary, and it says it fits in. But okay, that'll be just disappointing. But so that's just my personal notes on the things. But I'm also here with the group, our Milton, and I just wanted to say a little bit of who we are. We started here as a group, and my wife got pulled into politics, I guess, for the first time when the start of this proposal started. The origins really date back to the old group called Save Our Milton. And with a lot of other people's help, I understand, they got something at the end of our street stop that didn't fit, and they came together. We're all diverse backgrounds. We've got people that have lived here multi-generations, to raised families, to ourselves. we all share something in common. We want the best for this community. And I want to stress, we've been called NIMBYs, unlined, and we're not. We want Milton to thrive and prosper. And we want the best for Milton. We realize we need affordable housing, we need new business, we need everything. And you guys, from what I've read in my thing, have got a very, very thoughtful official plan. It meets needs of growth. It recognizes sensitive areas like the area we're trying to protect here, and it balances all those things. And I'm just saying, don't walk away from it. It's a very good thing. Because the worst part is if you walk away from the plan you have now, you're setting a very, very big precedent. And that you won't be able to use the plan again. And like Marcia said, you may as well throw out the plan if you're not going to abide by it. And this proposal goes over that plan in so many ways. It goes against the plan, it goes against all kinds of guides that have been set up, from tall building, mid-rise, to know before you buy. Like, there are so many ways that this does not fit for this petition. Now, we will be here as a group, our Milton, to support anything that meets this official plan and moves this town forward. And also, Mr. Turkadesha, we will be with you arm in arm to fight the province if they try to give the town trying to represent our citizens. We will be there in arm and make that fight, whatever we can. Like, this is what governance is all about. This is what democracy is all about. And you guys have done great jobs, like the work that has gone into the official plan and all this, and we're trying to amend it. Let's not throw it all away. Let's not all throw it away. I'll just leave on a last note, and this is a little bit named at Mr. Durante in a way, who I understanding has a long history in this community for doing an awful lot of things, and a little to Mr. Mayor Krantz, who's also has a long, long history with doing things. This is a quote by Benjamin Franklin, and it states, "It takes many good deeds to build a good reputation, and only one bad one to lose it." So let's not do something bad here. And I just hope you will help us and protect what we have here. Thank you very much.
Okay, being no questions? Oh, yeah. No, there's no questions, sir. Okay, anybody else in the public would like to speak? Sir, please come forward.
I'm Andre Gagne, 14 Victoria Street. My wife and I are opposed to this project. My wife, unfortunately, is not available to come here to present her bit, but in summary of her speech here, she's basically supporting development. However, she's not in favor of this magnitude. And she's also pointing out that we have an official plan and we should stick to it. And as the Mayor Krantz is very opposed to the CN intermodal, and he uses the official plan as the cause to object to it, I would hope that the same zeal will be used for this development, because it is outside the official plan. And it is really not in the interest of the neighbors, as you've heard so far. As for myself, I've written a few things hastily before I came here. And one disappointment that I've had with the second application is that the application was put in just before Christmas to the city, and the notices was sent 6 weeks later, giving me basically 3 weeks to come up with some sort of comment on it to the town. And I find that a little absurd that it took 6 weeks, and I would like the town to answer to what is the process and the procedures and how quickly it should happen. I don't know, 6 weeks seems to be out of line to me anyway. That is just off the subject. But in what it is of concern for me is, can we have the staff present to the resident and the council some sort of report of the delta that the development has proposed in this, from the first one and the second one, and how it adhered or complied or followed some of the recommendation of what the staff had done on the first report. And on the topic of the first report, I have no clue where to find it on the website. And that seems to be odd, because I go to the first application and then you see the application, but you don't see the town staff report, you don't see the town staff meeting of the first one. So that is another segue off the topic here, sorry. So I'd like to have some, for example, you know, is it meeting the zoning bylaws? Is it the parking bylaws? Is it meeting the setback, the traffic situation? Has it improved? Or does it get worse? Things like that. That's what I'd like to see presented to the public as well as to the council, so that the council has the ability to make proper decision on this project. I would like to also, the town staff, to be available a couple of weeks before the vote comes in, so that we have a chance to kind of make a chance to review it and report back to our councillor of our ward, or so that we can have a say to it, because I find this kind of odd. Here we are, we're talking about this project, but we have no idea what the town staff thinks about this project, and it is not available for us to comment. And it's kind of odd that we're going to have this vote and then we don't have some sort of rebuttal, the way I understand the process. Per the project proposed amendment, I would like the town staff to identify and make public a report of the town OP deviations and impact to the town. For example, the intersection of traffic will be probably, well, the intersection is already F, but the increased traffic, Bronte and Victoria, Bronte and Mill, Bronte and Mary, King, Elizabeth. These intersections will now also then be impacted. And all of a sudden we may have new lights to be installed, we may have to widen the intersection on Bronte. Who pays for it, and what is the town? Is it the town on the hook for it? If it is, it should be part of your decision making. These are incurring costs that are hidden that may come down this road, and the OP was to protect you against that, but now if you're deviating from the OP, you are exposing yourself to those liability. And I'd like to have a report from the town staff that defines these and the costs that may occur or incur if this project goes as proposed. I would like the developer to identify what they will do to mitigate the increased traffic caused by the development from overflowing on residential street like Mill Street, Victoria, Mary Street, and in the area. Because I know the traffic will increase, we have to accept that. However, I do want to make sure that the traffic does not come onto roads that are not meant for it. As a previous delegate that came did mention parking on Victoria Street, and Victoria becomes mainly a one-way street, especially in the summer when the kids goes and play baseball in the back on the diamonds on the Rotary Park. Victoria is just a parking lot from my Bronte all the way down to James Street, and Mill Street is also. Victoria is barely capable of taking one car parked and having a car pass by it without putting a pedestrian at risk. We have to be very cognizant of this slight detail. Also, is the town prepared to handle the bylaw infractions like parking in the neighborhood? Because right now I don't see much support on that front. I see a lot of people parking on the wrong side of Victoria Street, never gets parked tickets. There's people that parks on Victoria Street for more than 3 hours, There's one that parks in front of my house for the whole afternoon. Comes in around 11 and leaves around 5. Why is he not ticketed? That happens every day. Town and police increase. Will the town ask the police to increase their traffic violation, like speeding on Mill Street? As people has mentioned, there's going to be potential cut-through traffic to those intersections. And then, so if they don't want to go to Bronte, they're going to use Mill or Victoria to try to go through. And they will go at speeds to, oh, I can go faster to get to where I want. Well, those streets are residential, there's kids around. We ought to be cognizant of that detail as well. So please do take the time to consider all of those small details. That's about it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, sir. Are there any questions from Councillor Mead?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have a question for the delegate, but I think it might be useful to just remind us all of the process, because I think there might be some confusion on when we make a decision.
I was going to mention, a lot of the questions you've asked, and that would have been asked tonight, staff has taken a recording of that. And a lot of those questions will be answered as we move forward in the process and we get to the technical report and we finally see a staff recommendation. And I'm sure that the public will be given enough notice of what's going to be coming before council and the reasoning behind whatever the recommendation is. So that is why it's a public meeting. Staff is taking a recording and notes of all the questions, and they will be dealing with it. That's part of the process to get to a final technical report.
I understand that it is. However, the public notice for this was 6 weeks late. So to me, it sounds like something is not being handled properly in this process.
We've taken note of that and we'll look into it.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Anybody else from the public would like to speak? Ma'am? Which one's speaking?
Actually, she's dying for a chance to talk. But, so this is Violet. We live at 23 Bronte. This building is going to be one of our closest neighbors. This building makes me really nervous because I do have 2 small children and an empty lot directly beside my house between myself and the LCBO. And if you can shoehorn this into the TSC spot, I can only imagine what would happen next door to me one day. We would also like to know where all of the children in this building are going to go to school. J.M. Deniers is not going to be able to, accommodate those children, and I don't know that Thomas Street will either. Do you have anything to say? No, you've been very patient. That's all we've got. We're going to go home. Thank you very much.
Okay. Anybody else out there want to speak?
Thank you. I just wanted to address one thing that you brought up, and that was should we go out and spend $350,000 fighting this? Well, my understanding out of the gate, if this was proposed, the taxpayers of Milton would be on the hook for $275,000, non-recoverable. In addition to that, if we needed to expand the roads at Bronte and Main Street, that would be millions from the municipality, which we all pay a portion of our taxes to. So it would be a good spend to argue this if we have to move forward. So there are funds there that would cover it. Are we just going to give it to the developer, $275,000, and potentially spend millions in other costs in expanding the roads, changing the bridge out, and so on? Or are we going to move forward and argue our position as we should? That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anybody else out there want to speak? Not seeing any hands. I'll ask one more time. I don't see any hands, so I'll declare this portion of the meeting over and I will now read the recommendation. Moved by Councillor Lee, seconded by Councillor Hamid. Be it resolved that the Planning and Development Report PD 008-20 be received for information. Now, any questions or comments from members of council? Councillor Best.
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, I have a few questions to ask staff. The first one, as Mr. Brown mentioned earlier, are we going to have a 3D rendering in the technical report of this and any other future high-rise development? Because this is a concern I have, seeing two different versions that are on social media right now.
So through you, Mr. Chair, we can work with the applicant to ensure that the future technical report has 3D renderings that accurately show what they're proposing. And we can also work with the applicant to provide some additional information within the next coming weeks of the current application before council.
Thank you. If anyone's interested, the town did their own 3D rendering of the Civic Square under the downtown study. I'd ask people to look at it. Second question, on page 4 of the report, page 60 of the agenda, it mentions of having the, under the scenario, no additional parking spaces required for commercial and office uses. Rather, residential uses, commercial customers, and commercial tenants would share the same parking spaces. Has the town ever done this before in terms of approving a development?
So through you, Mr. Chair, so that's correct. The applicant today has proposed to do a shared parking scenario between the visitor parking and the commercial and office uses parking. So that's being evaluated through a transportation impact assessment and a parking justification report that our town staff's looking at. It's my understanding that we have had similar parking situations approved in the town. In particular, I believe that the MU zone permits a similar shared parking rate.
I'd ask the staff look at a real-life example at Thompson Square at the northeast corner of Thompson and Derry Road, where even the board directors admit they do not have enough parking, and as a result, every day there's between 6 to 12 cars parking all day across the street in neighboring residential streets. Third question regarding the status of 130 Thompson Road. Mr. Brown and I believe another delegation mentioned of the concern regarding the Jackal Holdings application. What is the current status of that? Because I understand it was referred to the LPAT.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councillor Best, it is still before the LPAT. However, it is staff's understanding that a settlement between the developer and the appellant is imminent.
Well, stay tuned on that one. And also, in concerning this and the other areas, because I count along Bronte Street on both sides between Derry and Main Street 8 other applications or under construction. Do we look at the accumulated impact of development on a street, not just one? Because as my concern, you just go down the street, you can see either construction signs or town planning signs. Are we looking at that as part of the whole overall development, not just one application?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, the aggregate impacts of all applications are considered as well as future potential uses.
Let's be looking forward to that. Also, is staff considering having a transit route north of Main Street along Bronte? Because if this is the first of possibly other developments, I could see a transit route connecting Steeles and Main Street. And this is a concern of mine of the timing, because the town has already approved work on Bronte Street North in terms of upgrading and straightening the road. But I want to see how this development connects in with any future plans for the area.
Through you, Mr. Chair, given this is my first official day in charge of transit, I will have to get back to you on that question, Councillor Best.
Well, that is part of my concern is as part of the technical report, and I'd hope that all public comments be included in that report. Also, regarding the Escarpment View Park, the future plans, could you staff also include how that works in there? Because if we start putting lighted ball diamonds in there and this is approved, I can see people complaining about work the town does. And this we have to look at as not only the existing residents, and I appreciate everyone attending tonight, but also future residents. We are looking at 508 units, possibly 1,000 people living in this building. if they might have concerns. So we have to look to their future as well. Also, a question is about the hydro lines. They're very close to this building. What is the status of those, and what is the plans for the building, the hydro lines in front of the area? And also the impact of the CN intermodal, as the mayor's motion tonight highlights. It's not only impact, south of Britannia Road, but also what would the impact of having 4 additional trains unloading thousands of containers on this location. So, Mr. Chairman, that's the end of my questions. I have a few more comments later.
I'd be surprised if there weren't. Councillor Dirksen and then Councillor Dilleren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few questions to staff. With respect to an issue that's brought up quite a few times with the nature of the mature character neighborhood that's very close proximity to the development, I just want some comment on how we delineate these types of areas. So clearly this development application is outside the boundary that, for example, the mature character neighborhood study is studying. Do we, and it was mentioned that we have policies that are supposed to be sensitive to adjacent character neighborhoods. Is there anything specific, a buffer zone, a transitional zone, actual numbers, or is it just kind of like it has to pass a sniff test?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, through the analysis and evaluation of the application, we would consider appropriate transitions. That's partly why we look at shadow studies, built form guidelines, and a number of other studies that have been submitted in conjunction with this application to assist specifically with that sort of review.
Okay, so there's no hard and fast numbers, it's just, okay, thank you. Second question is with respect to Mr. Brown's presentation, the first one where he brought up the commitment we did make to sustainability and climate change mitigation. Could staff comment on what type of lens they're applying when they review these types of applications now with an eye to sustainability and our commitments to mitigating climate change?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we will use the policies that are currently in the official plan, as well as we have new provincial policy statement that was brought forward late last week, which also contains policies relative to climate change. All applications have to be consistent with the provincial policy statement direction. So that is the analysis that we would apply.
Okay, and last question. I believe the rail line that runs very close to where this development is potentially going to be, it's CN, correct? And they had an opportunity to comment on the application, or will they be commenting? Are they considered a commenting body?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, the application has been circulated to CN Rail. It's a statutory agency to be circulated, as well as a property owner within the circulation area.
Have we received a response from them?
So through you, Mr. Chair, we have received a response from CN Rail on the first submission, and we've recirculated them on the second submission to see if they have any additional comments. CN Rail does have some development guidelines for development of sensitive land uses adjacent to rail corridors, and it's my understanding that this development does comply with those guidelines. It's mainly in relation to setbacks and berming and fencing requirements, as well as warning clauses that are put into any site plan agreements or condominium agreements in the future.
Okay, that's all for my questions. Thank you.
Councillor Di Lorenzo.
My question is similar to Councillor Tester-Dirksen's, but different. She mentioned the sustainability and climate change, and I read the Vice Canada article that one of the delegates sent us, and it mentions about that some municipalities are looking at stricter energy codes for new buildings that would, in some situations, surpass what the upper tier governments are proposing. So I heard town staff say that we're looking at the new provincial policy coming out, and that'll guide us to our own policies. But I wanted to ask, is the municipality able to set stricter energy codes than the province is recommending? Is that possible, or is that something that if we propose that and we try to make a more stricter energy code that would cause more passive house-level energy efficiencies? Because what the delegate was saying about the glass towers, it is true, and I know the provincial policy is going in a direction to make modest improvements, but there's other municipalities that are looking into this, but none of them in Ontario have passed it yet. So I wasn't sure if that's something feasible or if that's just smoke and mirrors, wishful thinking.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we will take that back and consult with our chief building official and look at what we are able to do through the Ontario Building Code and can address that in a future technical report.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Mayor Krantz?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mention was made on one or two occasions with the circulation times, and I guess the question to staff is approximately when will the report be coming back? And given the public opportune time, whether it be a week, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months prior to the recommendations, I think that they deserve to roughly know when we hope to have it back, whether it be in 2 months, 6 months, and how much lead time do they have to present?
Commissioner Koopman, or?
So through you, Mr. Chair, we're currently in the process of reviewing the second submission in detail. So we've circulated all the revised reports out to various town departments and external agencies such as the region of Halton. So it will take some time to get all those comments back, as well as to review all of the the public comments that we've received at this meeting, as well as previous statutory public meeting. So at this time, it's hard to say when our technical report will be done because it's all dependent on how long it takes for us to review all those reports, and we might have additional questions for the applicant and clarification. But once we do have a technical report, we will notify all members of the public who have provided comments, as well as we'll put another ad in the paper, and we will have a report available on the website in advance of the meeting.
Mr. Chairman, the question is there any ballpark? Are we talking about probably June, July? I'm looking for something that, I'm not rushing it, but I think the public, including us, need to know when it's coming back. Roughly, ballpark.
Okay, I believe staff is tough to answer that part of the question. My greater concern, and I think what is the concerns of the public, is once staff has done all their reports and studies and consultation, how much time will the local residents have to look at it? That, I think, what is our normal procedure?
Part of my question as well.
Can we move that a bit to give them more time? But I think that's of a greater concern as to once everything is ready and the report is ready, how much time will the residents have to review it and comment? Yep. Can someone from staff give us an idea?
Based on the circulation of the application, I would anticipate that we will not be finished our technical review probably for at least a couple of months. We can certainly look at timing in terms of tabling the report. It has been our practice to not release reports publicly until they are also tabled with council. So we can look at how we can assist with that timing and perhaps give a little bit of additional time for consideration of the report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Senator, for the question. And I think, staff has heard your concerns, and you will be given as much notice as possible, I believe, and I think that's the will of council as well. Councillor Cluett, you have a question for staff?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks everybody for your presentations. We did take a lot of notes, and we are going to be listening to this. My question is to staff. A number of the delegates brought up a possibility, obviously, of the increasing traffic within the area. And we all know that Main Street has to the west of Bronte has the CN rail overpass. Is there a timing, and I can't recall off the top of my head, as to when that will be widened, or if it will be widened? I'm assuming it will be widened.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Currently, we have a project that's being coordinated with CN to put 2 pedestrian tunnels through the embankment. So that will provide us with more width underneath the grade separation, existing grade separation. But it's basically, as you see it to the west, Main Street does narrow down to 2 lanes with a center turn lane.
So essentially, there would be no widening of the road in that area, just the pedestrian additions to the underpass.
Right, because right now, the pedestrians are walking within the existing grade separation, so that'll be taken away.
Any other questions from council for members of staff? Questions, not comments.
Thank you, Chair. My question to the clerk's department is to just clarify the procedure. Once the technical report comes to council, are residents able to sign up as delegates, come and share their thoughts? Because I thought there was some confusion on this with regards to Mr. Andrew Garnier, the gentleman in red shirt. So I just want you to clarify that procedure.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So specifically for a public meeting, which is happening tonight, delegates are not required to register ahead of time. It is encouraged, just so that we do have a list so that they can be dealt with in order. As far as the technical report and when that would be brought forward, it is like any other agenda item. So delegations could register ahead of time to be part of to speak on that item. It just would be through the deadline, which would be the Wednesday, not the week before, the week prior to the week before by 1 p.m. Excuse me, sorry, Monday of the meeting at 10 a.m.
10 a.m. Thank you.
Yeah, just for everybody's clarification, when it does, it will not be an open public meeting like this where we'll ask for a hands, okay? You would have to, if you wish to speak to the technical report, we would ask that you register as a delegate so we'll know where we're going and how much time we're looking at, all right? So that, just to make that clear to everybody that's here. Okay, if there's no other questions, we'll have comments. Councillor Best, you're first, and I will hold you to 10 minutes.
Oh, darn. Yeah, I have to cut it in half. Well, as some of the delegates mentioned, that this area does need upgrading. I like Mr. Jones's comment that the TSC needs TLC. That's probably the best version I could see. I do favor development, but as long as it doesn't burden the neighborhood and it benefits everyone. And that's the dilemma that as a council we face on any request, because there is a number of asks here. Some of them are stretching, and in terms of our parking, our height. And if anyone wants to see an exact example of what we could envisage for the site, for 18 floors, all you have to do is look at the water tower on Steeles Avenue. According to regional staff, it's 56 meters or 186 feet, which is almost equivalent with what this building is. So if you want to drive out there and take a look at what this would be in comparison. I favor a 3D version. I think that we can see exactly not only this development, but other future developments. And I hope that staff in future have this as a requirement of any high-rise application that everybody can see, so they have their, basically a scientifically designed, because I know how things can be stretched one way or the other. There is some software out there that can be done. And in terms of Bronte Street itself, we're seeing a transition from a lot of vacant area and old former industrial to a mixed-use area. You only have to look at the area south of Main Street to see how that's changing, and I can raise the concern that Violet or her mother raised, that, where's the schools? Because a lot of young people are moving into condo apartments, and that is a fair distance for young children to get to Martin Street School or J.M. Denier, so that's a concern as well. If you look at Oakville, Kerr Street has gone through this transformation over the last 10 years, and asked the staff contact the town of Oakville staff and see how they've managed that, because it can be done, but you have to be prepared for things happening that you don't expect, such as these type of developments and other ones, because we have a lot of unknowns here. not only the work that's being done on Bronte Street North, also Tremaine Road. How much traffic is that going to take off this area? Also, what's going to happen with the P.L. Robertson one? Eventually, something's going to happen there. You know, the cost of contamination removal is reduced. We also have a possible development on the Meritor site on Steeles Avenue. So I'm asking staff not only to look at the exact immediate area, but overall, because we have to look to the future, because we have to get it right the first time, and we don't have a second chance. Thank you.
Any other comments from members of council? Councillor Terser-Dirksen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too want to thank everyone for coming tonight to provide their comments. I do want to recognize that the developer did make changes. But I heard the residents as well. It's still an imposing structure. There's still issues with parking, traffic. It actually reminds me of the debate we had about the proposed development at the corner of Derry and Bronte and across from the hospital, the issue with traffic, ingress and egress, I think it was. Like I picture something similar at this small intersection from which I live not too far. So I do understand the traffic issues there. Some of the issues brought up by residents I don't have as much empathy for. Blocking the view of the escarpment. I mean, nobody has a monopoly on the view of the escarpment. Nobody has ownership of it. Well, hear me out. Including the developer, okay? So that's something that, you know, I don't necessarily think carries as much weight as some of the other points that you did make, which I appreciate. Very concerned about affordable housing in this town. I think there's a balancing act we need to strike between what types of affordable units we're offering to people. I would like to see a blanket policy where all development has to include a minimum number of geared to income units. I think that's really important. We need to see that, and I think it's something that should be considered within this application. Climate change. This is a tough one. It's near and dear to my heart, and I know many of my colleagues. We're told that high density is better for the environment because we're not eating up as much land, and yet we have conflicting reports about the materials that are being used in the off-gas and the greenhouse gases in these glass condominiums. As long as we are forced to continue building, we will be affecting the climate and the environment. The trick is going to be to minimize our effects there. I don't have the answer. I'm not an expert in this regard, and that's something we'll be depending on staff to provide to us. And as far as the boundary with the historical area, again, an issue that's very dear to mine and Councillor Best's hearts with respect to the mature neighborhood study. My concern is where we draw that line, and that's why I asked staff about this transitional buffer area. You know, it's not within the historical area. So how far are we going to let that area affect development outside of it? That's something we have to consider. And I was trying to think about other potential developments that have come up in the past in this area, and there's really not many. I guess Millside Towers might have been one. I recall it being constructed. I don't recall the discussions people were having at the time about it. I was too young. But I'm sure Councillor Best or the Mayor could jump in there and maybe talk about how some of the concerns that residents had were resolved with that development. But those are all my comments for tonight. I just want residents to know that it's tough. I mean, we hear you guys, we live out there, we understand the concerns, we have to live with them too, but we are mandated to continue to bring in housing, and how we do it, how we balance the conflicting interests between the neighbors and the new people who need affordable housing. This is the trick that we're tasked with, and we're gonna do our best, but it's gonna take a lot of consideration from my colleagues and staff, and I hope you can appreciate the position we're in, and we'll do the best we can. Thank you.
Councillor Challoner.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just on the notion of the escarpment. So, His Worship, Councillor Best, yourself, myself, were here when the current official plan was approved. The primary vision of that plan and all the work that went around it, in fact, was the opportunity for as many members of the community to see the escarpment on a regular basis. And so it was designed with that in mind. There was an error that was made in 1972 with the construction of an apartment building on Bronte Street. Primarily at that time, apartment development occurred on the eastern boundary of the community, which at that time was pretty much Ontario Street. And that development took place before Dorset Park was developed. So there is that vision, and I strongly suspect that, with the new official plan that is underway, that vision will continue. I'd be very surprised if the community said, no, we don't care about the escarpment anymore. We don't care if we don't see it. I just don't see that happening. And so there is a reason, and it needs to be followed. And I, like Councillor Best and everybody else, I suspect, support some sort of residential development on that site. But it has to meet guidelines that allow people to have that vista. And vista was a term that was used in the official plan. So I would hope that in the discussion that takes place with the developer and the discussion that takes place between staff with other agencies, they contemplate that notion of vista that we attempted to protect in the 97 plan that I suspect is going to be a focus in the next plan.
Thank you. Any other further comments before I call the vote? Okay, before, again, the vote is on the resolution just to accept the report. But before I call the vote, on behalf of council, I want to thank everybody who took their time out to come out here tonight to speak to council. And rest assured that staff, members of council, and the developer have heard your concerns and will be seriously looking at everything by the time the technical report. We understand the seriousness of this project and the impact that it will have no matter what is approved. So again, thank you for coming out, and rest assured that your concerns have been heard. Okay, no other comments. I will call the vote on the resolution to accept the report for information. All those in favor? That motion passes. Again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. That's it for that portion of the meeting. If you want to stay for the rest of it, you're more than welcome to. We'll give a few minutes for those of you who want to. Hey? I thought you were here to see me. All right, members of council, if you would please take your seats. And Councilor Reid. All right, we're going to call the meeting back to order. So, members of council, we have an in-camera item. I think everything's pretty clear. If you read the yellow paper, is there anyone who wishes to go in camera?
Mr. Chairman, I would just move it if you don't already have a resolution.
We already have a mover and seconder. Moved by Councillor Lee, seconded by Councillor Hamid. Be resolved that the recommendation contained in staff report CORS 012-20 be approved. Any questions, comments from staff, from council? Being none, all those in favor? Motion passes. Okay. So now we'll go back into open session. We didn't go, so all right. So the next motion, dealing with items for consideration. First report is staff report CORS-11-20, development charge rebate program. Any comments from members of council? Councilor Challoner.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. My assumption is that, and it's not stated here, but my assumption is that we're a future council, or perhaps this council near the end of its mandate, decide to revise the development charges legislation that we have for this community, and decided at that point in time that agricultural organizations, museums were exempt from paying development charges, then we could do so, and it would just simply make this policy null and void. I mean, essentially, we're doing this instead of revising the Act because we can't revise the Act at this point in time. Is that correct?
That is correct. The policy itself actually states that the term of the policy will be until the next development charge update, which will be during this term of council. So at that point, council will have another chance to potentially embed it within a development charge bylaw, maintain it as a separate bylaw, or choose another avenue.
And my second question, Mr. Chairman, if we were to do that, this council would not be digging any new ground, because my understanding is the first act that we passed, I think in about 1992, also exempted some agricultural concerns.
Agricultural uses are exempt within our bylaw. This is expanding it for the ancillary uses at agricultural sites. So this is a continuation. What actually currently as well is in our bylaw is the first 50 square meters of development. So again, this is really just an expansion of what's already envisioned to a certain degree in the bylaw.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. Staff report CORS-11-20, the development charge rebate program. At the council meeting of February the 10th, 2020, council deferred staff report CORS-001-20 regarding the development charge rebate program. Staff report CORS-11-20 is being presented at this evening's meeting as a revised report to replace staff report CORS-001-20 and withdraw this previous report from consideration. So I have a motion by Councillor Lee, seconded by Councillor Mead, that recommendation be approved. No further question?
Sorry, just for clarification, the recommendation as proposed in the report or as mentioned in the report to enact this program, there's a resolution in the body of the report, and I'm not sure if that's been moved. So I just want to be clear on what we're voting on, if that's all right.
There's been an amendment moved by by Mayor Krantz, seconded by Councillor Best, and I'll read it. Be resolved, whereas the town has long been associated with its agricultural, historic, and cultural roots, and whereas Council has supported development as well as the advancement of programs that help highlight the importance of the town's history as an agricultural center, and has encouraged tourism and education to support that continued recognition of its past, including existing exemptions from certain charges. And whereas Council has determined that additional steps should be taken by the town to highlight the importance of the town's history and cultural connection to agriculture, that a development charge rebate program be approved in accordance with Section 107 of the Municipal Act, and as outlined in the program attached as Schedule A with a financial rebate equal to 100% of the town development charges payable for development applications meeting the definition of agricultural tourism building or a structure and or museum to a maximum cumulative total of $40,000 per property. Mayor Krantz, you want to speak to it? Or?
Chairman, very quickly, that's pretty well self-explanatory. And again, if we looked at the in-camera report that we just approved, it described it in some detail, which had to be in camera. So we all should understand what evolved legally. So.
Being no other, Councillor Best.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for clarifying that, because I think you were confusing everybody in the audience here. So I appreciate staff for their work and research on this. And as mentioned earlier, that at the previous meeting, there's only 2 or 3 locations that could even qualify for this. So I appreciate the work that went into this and the clarification.
Okay, being no further questions, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Okay, so now we move on to okay, now we get on to the next item, which is the so I'll read the motion. And moved by Councillor Lee, seconded by Councillor Hamid. Be it resolved that the Service Delivery Review Phase 2 scope of work as presented on Schedule B be approved, and that the approved budget for Project C100130019 Service Delivery Review be increased by $96,000 to a revised total of $354,750 from funding from the project variance account. Any questions? Councillor Challoner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm in favor of the of what is proposed. I have a couple questions. There was some discussion amongst senior staff during the first part of the review, the core services review, and some comments made later about how the process could be improved. And my assumption is that in preparing for the second phase, staff have sat down and said, okay, so how can we make this better the next time around? Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, yes, the senior management team has discussed and debriefed phase 1, and we're all involved in coming together to recommend phase 2, the terms of reference here for you.
Thank you. My second question, Mr. Chairman, through you, is the additional cost. So what is that composed of? Why is there an additional cost of $96,000?
Mr. Chairman, the additional cost relates specifically to the quotation received from the vendor, which is Deloitte, for the terms of reference that are attached to this report and are being recommended for approval. And there is also some component for this for project management service, which we will be recovering from internal budget savings.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Di Lorenzo?
I had a question. In Schedule A, I know one of the items in there was repurposing the outdoor pool, and there was like a recommendation to fill in the rotary pool and use it as like a park instead of having outdoor pool. I just want to confirm, like, the final decision on that, even though it's like a recommended, there will still be a final decision for council on that, or is that like these Schedule A's aren't happening just by themselves? There'll still be a future decision point. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct. All of the 18 priority opportunities that were identified as part of service delivery, it's actually embedded in a resolution that it has to come back to council for final approval. So whatever the business plan related to the initiative, whatever financial implications or efficiencies would be found, and it will be subject to council approval.
Thank you.
Councillor Cluett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a few comments on this. I'm really glad that we're moving now towards the second phase of this. I think the expectations that a lot of people had for the core services review in the past were kind of underwhelming as to their actual results from a cost savings point of view. But I think it was a really good exercise for those first two departments. And I think we're going to see a lot of the feedback that we receive from the residents in the community are mainly in these two areas of community services and operations. So we're looking forward to seeing some of the input that we get or the results that we get back, and that we're adopting letting the public know that we're actually adopting a continuous improvement process in doing this as we continue to grow. So thanks very much, and I fully support this report.
Anybody else before I have my say? No? Okay. Members of the council, comes as a surprise, I have a problem with what is being proposed here. In 2019, council approved a budget of $258,000 for a consultant to conduct a service delivery review. Now, I wasn't too crazy about that. I had problems supporting paying a consultant $250,000 to do what I believe senior management and council could have done in-house. But that was the council's decision. So we spent $150,000 for phase one. And what we got was a consultant report that basically recommended the status quo. $150,000 to tell us basically to continue business as we've been doing. As far as I'm concerned, that was a complete waste of money. Now here we are looking at not only spending the $107,000 balance of the original $258,000, but staff is asking for an additional $96,000 over budget for phase two. A review of services provided for corporate services. Personally, I cannot support paying another $96,000 of taxpayers' money to a consultant that I suspect will come back with a report advocating basically the status quo. And I would ask members of council, ask yourselves, is this the best use of $96,000 of taxpayers' money? So I'm not in support. The $107,000 that was budgeted, that's in there, let's move it. I have a problem with the $96,000. So we gave staff a budget to work with, and my recommendation would be that staff move forward under that directive. But if there's no other comments, then okay.
Yeah, I've heard the comment about underwhelming, and I understand, you know, what you're saying. The first phase identified about $650,000 in savings, and my issue was when it would start, and it is starting later. It's starting this year. And it's up to council ultimately to decide how much of that will occur and how much of it won't. And I don't believe, Mr. Chairman, that that council or most members of staff necessarily, they may know of things where savings could be had. Do they know how they can get there? And the value that this consultant provides is providing a path to that savings, and quite frankly, through the discussion, should be identifying other paths that perhaps aren't noted in the initial savings. And so I see the value, but I understand your concern, Mr. Chairman. But I think that let's see how this second phase rolls out. Let's see if staff are satisfied with the result, and then I think it's probably appropriate for staff and council to have a further discussion as to, you know, where we go from the point the consultant takes us, because I think we identified as council some additional opportunities for through the first phase, which we have yet to discuss. that I think will accrue savings beyond the $650,000.
Any other comments before I call the vote? Okay. All right, do I have to read the resolution again, or does everybody understand what it is? Okay, so all those in favor of the staff recommendation? Motion passes. All right, moving on to staff report CORS 008-20. Administrative Monetary Penalty System business case. Have a motion moved by Councillor Lee, seconded by Councillor Hamid. Be it resolved that staff be directed to proceed with the implementation of the Administrative Monetary Penalty System AMPS program based on the business case attached to this report as Appendix A with an anticipated start date of 2021, and that staff be directed to bring forward the necessary policies and bylaws required to administer the AMPS program for Council's consideration. Do we need the staff presentation, or does members of Council have any questions? It's pretty straightforward. I don't have a problem with it, but if any members of Council have a question. Councillor Lee?
I just wanted to know if Town of Milton will be appointing the hearing officer.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So pending council approval, we will be working forward with an implementation plan. So there will be two sort of roles as part of AMPS, which will be the screening officer as well as a hearing officer. So we will be looking at these policies and processes as we move forward with implementation. We'll be looking at other municipalities who have similarly gone through the implementation of AMPS, looking at the arrangements that they have had in place in the use of contracted services individuals with administrative law background to provide such services as a potential model.
Thank you. My only concern is that if the screening officer is a town employee and the hearing officer is a town employee, I think there is a conflict there, because the resident has to feel comfortable coming in knowing that his application will be dealt with objectively. So I want staff to look into it in a better way where we can find a solution that is more objective.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, thank you. More policies and procedures will be coming forward as we move forward with implementation. We'll take those comments into consideration.
Thank you.
Being no further questions or comment, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Motion passes. All right. Okay, that's that one. Okay, now the next one. The procedure. Okay. And this is on the notice of motion, resolution to waive procedure to deal with, so I'll read the resolution. Moved by Mayor Krantz, seconded by Councillor Bess. Be it resolved, whereas Procedure Bylaw 007-2019 provides that notices of motion shall not be discussed or debated upon introduction, but shall be included on the next regular council meeting agenda for consideration. And whereas Section 7.9.3 of the Town of Milton Procedure Bylaw 007-2019 as amended permits a notice of motion to be considered upon its introduction by an affirmative vote of 2/3 of the members present, and whereas it is deemed impractical or not in the best interest of the town to delay consideration, therefore be it resolved that the permanent rules contained in Section 7.9 of Procedure Bylaw 007-2019 be waived to permit the introduction and consideration by council of the notice of motion on the council agenda pertaining to the proposed CN Milton logistics hub. Anyone want to comment to it, or we'll call the vote? All those in favor? That motion passes. Now dealing with the notice of motion. Yeah, okay. So it's a pretty lengthy one. So everybody's has it in their agenda. So it's moved by Mayor Krantz, seconded by Councillor Bess. Mayor Krantz, you want to speak to it?
Yeah, very quickly, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to suggest that we all can read, certainly, and again, as you had mentioned, it is very lengthy out there, and I know it's of real interest to the community there, and I know we're streaming live, but if anybody's really interested to find out, and they should be, get a copy of this, and it's the 4 area municipalities in the region of Halton and Conservation Halton is totally supportive of what we're doing here. It is time sensitive, so I would hope that it would be unanimously passed here this evening. And Mr. Chairman, I am going to suggest a recorded vote on it. And that happened at the regional level, as you're aware. So, thank you.
No problem. Councillor Mead?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to ask for a recorded vote that Mayor Krantz already did. I don't think I need to speak much on it because I think we're all unanimous and we've all covered it. I do want to mention one thing because someone asked me about it. Town of Milton, region of Halton, I'm not speaking on behalf of town or region, but myself at least, and I know most of the residents, none of us have any issues with CN or the hub. That's not what's on table. We're talking about the location. We're talking about the fact that CN thinks it's above all our regulations and all provincial legislations, and we're talking about the fact that CN doesn't want to go through the process. Really, that's what it is. Not CN, not hub, because sometimes people get confused about it. There was a letter in the Champion just in the recent publication where someone wrote in support because hubs are important and intermodals are important and CN's important. Yeah, we're not arguing any of that stuff. So I think it's important to articulate that point. Thank you.
Councillor Best?
Yes, I agree with the Mayor and Councillor Mead. This is something that affects all parts of the town and the region, because you look at 400 acres out of 1,200. What's the other 800 acres going to be used? Unknown. Development charges, the rule of law, and basically, we're a federal agency, but we don't want to abide by anything provincially, municipally. How is that going to be a good neighbor? Where does the community benefit from this? We're in basically a situation where someone just steamrolls, or just what we went through tonight. They don't even want to go through the process that every other applicant, every other private company has to go through. If we've seen in the last few weeks what has happened out west in terms of the blockades, you're asking for trouble when you start trying to railroad something through this town, and this is something that we have to stand up and fight this legally and make sure this is done properly, and they pay their fair share if they are approved. If they are not approved, we basically highlight what our plans are for this area and then make sure that it's economically viable, because this application is not.
Councillor Cluett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm going to echo everything basically everybody else has said, but just add a little bit to my own personal experience. I grew up in a suburb of Milton, which is the city of Brampton, and not too far away from the Brampton Intermodal Terminal, so I know what happens. I've lived about roughly about 8 to 9 kilometers away, and I've heard the impacts of what the intermodal is, a 24-hour operation, the banging, the clanging. So when someone, some organizations say, we're not going to have that much of an impact in the local residential community, I call a little bit of Barbra Streisand on that one. And again, to echo what Councillor Mead said, we want to reiterate to the public that this is not an anti-intermodal motion. This is our opposition is to the location, and to the fact of the matter is this proponent is not wanting to follow the process, and this could all go away if they decided to follow the process, and that's exactly what we're asking the federal government to do now that the panel report has been received, and I'm confident that it's going to be unanimous around this table, as it was around the Halton region table as well, and we're going to continue to advocate for the residents in the town of Milton. So thanks very much, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank Councillor Hamid for saying what he said, because as he said, there's a lot of misinformation. One of those is also that bringing the hub will take away traffic or take away trucks, because those trucks, the cargo on those trucks will go on the trains. Where will these trucks will be taken away from? From the highways, and they will be going through our town. 1,600 a day, that's just the beginning. Where will it end? So I just want to clear that misconception that bringing a hub here will take away trucks. That's not how it's going to be. That's not the reality. The fact is, it will bring in more trucks through roads such as Britannia, which is so far behind, and if anybody from the region is listening, please step on it. Thanks.
No other comments. A recorded vote has been requested. All those in favor of the motion as presented.
So in favor, Councillor Cluett, Councillor Ali, Councillor Best, Councillor Challenor, Councillor De Lorenzo, Mayor Krantz, Councillor Tesser-Dirksen, Councillor Hamid, Councillor Melbuff.
So the motion passes unanimously. All right, so moving right along. Okay, then we have the introduction of the notice of motion. Everybody has it. That not be dealing with that one tonight. That will be coming forward on March the 30th. Now we'll move to regional council updates. Anybody? Councillor Best, Mayor Krantz, Councillor Hamid, Councillor Cluett. Councillor Cluett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just sort of it goes along with the motion that we just passed. Halton Regional Council last meeting was unanimous with their support for this resolution to encourage the federal government to tell CN to follow the rules. And it was met obviously unanimously, and I believe there are plans in place for the 4 area municipality mayors to head to Ottawa to make it a little bit more formal along that. So I don't know if Mayor Krantz would like to comment on the status of that, but I think it's a good sign that we're still united at all 4 area municipalities along with Conservation Halton, and we're going to continue this until the federal cabinet makes its decision.
Councillor Best.
Yes, similar to Councillor Cluett, we've also been having a busy time between our 2 committees, Natural Heritage and Halton Agricultural Advisory Committee, having some joint meetings regarding the new regional official plan. And if anyone's interested, I encourage them to go to halton.ca under official plan, because there's a lot of work to be done over the next 2 years. Oh, and by the way, at the AMO, the province has now brought in a new provincial policy statement, which I understand their planner is and their department are reviewing. So if anyone can't get to sleep at night, yeah, you can read the small edition there, because there's a lot of impact, as we saw from the delegations tonight. You know, we're dealing with a 1998 official plan. We have a new policy. We have a new official plan. So I encourage anybody to get involved.
Sorry,
yeah, Mr. Chairman, just picking up on Councillor Cluett's comment there about the delegation to Ottawa. To the best of my knowledge, it's still on for next week, but it's not been totally confirmed. There's 2 or 3 days set aside there. You heard me mention about the resolution that passed unanimously, and I mentioned about it being time sensitive, and that was part of the time sensitive thing. So we could go down there and say the region of Halton, 4 municipalities, and the Conservation of Halton is solidly in support of what's being advocated here in Ottawa.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So that's it. Madam Clerk, have I forgotten anything, or what am I supposed to do next? Okay. I have a resolution moved by Councillor Lee, seconded by Councillor Hamid. Were you the only 2 here tonight? Be it resolved that bylaw numbers 012-2020, 013-2020, and 014-2020 be read, passed, and numbered, and that the mayor and the town clerk be authorized to sign the said bylaws, seal them with the seal of the corporation, and that they being engrossed in the bylaw book. All those in favor? That passes. And that's it. I call this meeting adjourned.
Point of order. Point of order.
Point of order. Councillor Challoner.
Yeah, thank you. And I understand, by the way, that what I'm asking for is unusual, and I don't like the notion of somebody like myself holding up the business of council any further. But I think we're in kind of an extraordinary circumstance with coronavirus and COVID-19, and in light of what has happened in the last week with respect to the spread of the disease outside of China, I think it would be incumbent upon town staff to huddle with Halton Health Services and other bodies, the province of Ontario, to understand what actions we should be taking. And I would say this, based on how closely I've been looking at this since early January. It's affected the financial markets dramatically. One of my largest clients is in the market. And, you know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I believe that we should be looking at things like, do we have notices potentially to put on front doors of our public facilities? Are we engaging with the public in terms of helping them understand what they have to do before they come in one of our facilities should this become worse? Should it be identified by the World Health Organization as a pandemic? Do we have sanitizers? Do we have masks? Are we engaging with the public in terms of how they should respond if they have a cold? In other words, do they come to a facility or stay home? And I don't want to grandstand. I don't want to make it larger than it is, but I think we should all be very concerned. We're an organization that, more so than a lot of organizations, because of the number of people who frequent our facilities, we're at risk. And we have the potential to put people at risk. And so I would ask that staff, if they haven't already started looking at this, that they do so as quickly as possible, and that they notify council as to what their intents are, what their decisions are with respect to managing this matter, because it could become very serious very quickly.
I understand, you know, the region has been looking at it. Our medical director of medical services is working on it. There is a plan at the region, and I'm sure they're communicating with the local municipalities to deal with it at the regional level. It is the regional jurisdiction, but I know that we've had presentations at the region of what the process is and what the procedures are and what precautions the region is managing in that file. So they are working on it, and I'm sure they'll be working with the local municipalities as well.
I was wondering if those emails could be forwarded to the local councillors as well, so we are on top of it as well.
All right, just ask staff to, contact with our, director of medical services and ask for the report and what the process is and how they're working on it and what the procedures are. That's not an issue.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Councillor Chandler, thank you very much for bringing that up, and you're certainly not grandstanding, and again, I think we have to be proactive instead of reactive, and I think that's what we're doing, but I know Councillor Hamid, as you're well aware, sits at that Health and Social Service, and I know the region takes it very serious as well, but I'm not sure what communications is evolving between the 4 area municipalities in the region of Halton, and Councillor Chandler mentioned Halton Health Services in the province of Ontario, but the region of Halton definitely has to be involved with the 4 area municipalities, and I'm not exactly sure where that is, but I'm sure the staff has heard, and they'll follow through on. I'm almost certain of that, being proactive instead of reactive. But again, Mr. Chairman, that's it. Thank you.
Councillor Hamid, you have a comment?
Yes, I want to quickly clarify. I did notice that some emails were sent out over the last week, including one today, and I mistakenly assumed they were sent to everyone. It seems like they were just sent to regional councillors, so I apologize for not noticing that. But yeah, I'm sure we can circulate that email and ask our staff to make sure that all the entire council is up to date. Yeah, had I noticed that, I would have forwarded the email to the rest of the council as well, but I didn't notice it. Thank you.
That's it. I'll call the meeting adjourned again. It's adjourned.